From the library of the New York Stock Exchange, at the corner of Wall and Broad Streets in New York City, you're inside the Ice House, our podcast from Intercontinental Exchange on markets, leadership, and vision in global business. The dream drivers that have made the NYSE an indispensable institution for global growth for more than 225 years. Each week, we feature stories of those who hatch plans, create jobs, and harness the engine of capitalism. Right here, right now, at the NYSE and at ICE's 12 exchanges and 7 clearinghouses around the world. Now here's your host, Josh King, Head of Communications at Intercontinental Exchange.
Hi, everyone. It was impossible, given the volatility in the markets the last few weeks, not to reach out to a man who's seen a peak or trough or two in his 50 years on Wall Street, my old friend Joe Plumeri, the legendary Citigroup exec and former chairman and CEO of Willis Group, to share his memories of when markets really dipped. Black Monday, October 19th, 1987, when the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 22.6% before, mercifully, the closing bell sounded. Joe's now on the board and vice chairman of another NYSE-listed company, First Data, but he's got an even more important role than steering a company through the ups and downs of a day's trading, fighting the scourge of opioid addiction that plagues so many parts of the country as the chairman of the National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse. Our conversation with Joe Plumeri on defying the odds, playing in traffic, and his toughest battle yet, right after this.
Inside the Ice House is presented this week by the Secure Financial Transaction Infrastructure, or the Safety Network. Safety is the backbone of the ICE platform, providing high-security, high-speed direct market access and trade execution capabilities to over 150 global markets. Safety connects data and analytics from more than 600 proprietary and third-party market sources. More on safety later in the show.
Joe Plumeri has seen it all in a career that began just blocks from where we're talking here in the library of the New York Stock Exchange. A top lieutenant to the legendary Sandy Weill, he took Willis Group public at the NYSE in 2000 and made billions for shareholders during his 13 years at the helm. But if you've never had the privilege of being in a packed house as Joe takes off his jacket and brings the audience to their feet following a 2-hour stem winder, I'm sorry, you really haven't learned to, as Joe says, play in traffic. The best-selling author of The Power of Being Yourself, Joe, our listeners won't get the full Plumeri with this conversation, but we'll try. Welcome to the Ice House.
Thanks, Josh. Nice to be here. Nice to be in this building.
First, Joe, at this stage of your life, you are a diversified investor, but what's your reaction to the volatility that we've seen in the market over the last few weeks? And what's a message you'd share with an investor keeping a close eye on their 401k?
I would say that the markets are what they are. I am blessed by having the experience and the history of having seen markets be volatile. The markets have been fantastic over the last year. The markets have been fantastic in January. And we all know what goes up must come down. And this is not going to happen forever. They correct. Technicians correct them. People concern themselves with inflation. They concern themselves with interest rates, when in fact interest rates and inflation are signs of healthy economies, not unhealthy economies. So when you see that as an underlying basis, and you see that the growth is now at 3% or better in the GDP, I look at all that and I say, the underpinnings of the society we live in and our economic culture is good. It's not bad. So what's happening out there is technicians, it's the volatility of the market, it's, I think I'll take a little bit off and take some profits, it's things like that. If the economy was not doing what it's doing, earnings are pure, earnings are good. Job rate is great. So when you look at all these things, which stems from the fact that the Fed thinks it's okay to raise interest rates, they wouldn't raise interest rates if they didn't think that there was a cushion in the economy.
So if you've got a time horizon, 2, 5, 10 years, fasten your seatbelt, go along for a bumpy ride, but things go up, things come down.
I was on Wall Street so long. I mean, I walked in this building on July 8th, 1968 for the first time, and the markets were in the 900 range. I will say that again. The markets were in the 900 range, in July of 1968. And we closed on Wednesdays to get the book straight because the volume was so big. And we were trading, I don't know, a couple, 3, 4, 5 million shares a day. It was crazy. But we closed because everything was done manually. So I remember being hired by Carter, Berlin and Weil, and they told me to come on over and spend a day with our Ford broker, and he'd go over, take something off the ticker, look at the ticker, it said buy 100 shares, walk it over to the booth where that stock was traded. Everybody was pushing and shoving, and it's crazy. But capitalism at its best, and I've been in this building so much, and the memories are so great, and it gives me a great deal of comfort to be able to know that it's still standing, which means the basis of capitalism is standing. The day you talked about the market crashing, if you will, the market was at 5,000.
Well, let's
it
actually
wasn't 25,000.
Let's actually go back, Joe, to that Monday over 30 years ago, October 19th, 1987. And to set the stage, here's how Sam Donaldson laid out the wreckage on ABC News.
Wall Street is closed tonight after the stock market's historic day of panic selling. The Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped roughly 508 points. But around the world at this hour, where it is already Tuesday, other stock exchanges are open for business. And the bad news is the massive selling is continuing elsewhere.
Joe, that day, you're director of marketing and sales for Shearson Lehman Brothers. You see the stock market tanking. What do you do?
Well, the first thing I did is I have 12,000 financial consultants who are getting calls from their clients panicking. And we had what was called Radio FCN, Radio Financial Consultant Network, which I put in so that I can communicate with 12,500 brokers. So at the end of the day, I got on and I gave them our view of what we thought the markets were doing and the fact that historically these things happen, that if you own a good stock, and there's nothing that this market shouldn't reflect on that stock. If you bought the stock because it was a growth stock and you were in for the long term, don't let this bother you. If you bought the stock because it was a growth stock and it gave dividends and it's still doing that, don't let this bother you. So you got to separate the markets from the individual stocks that you buy and what they're doing for the individuals you're doing them for. So if your objective is growth, it's still growing, the company's earnings are growing, the dividends are still being paid out, don't worry about the market. They're two different things. And that's the kind of conversations you have to have with people. So what I did that day was a long day. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I was on with the brokers from 4 o'clock or 3:30 in those days when we closed, 3:30 till I said, I'll sit here all night if you want me to, guys, because I knew that they wanted to talk to somebody because their clients were talking to them. It's an emotional thing. It's a human thing. I finally got home at 11 o'clock. I'll never forget this. And the phone rings. There were no cell phones. And the phone rings, and it's my father, who always wanted me to be a lawyer. And he said, he didn't know what was going on with the markets, but you couldn't help that day. Just being alive, you turn the TV on. And he said, how you doing? That's the way my father thought, how you doing? And I said, I'm doing okay, Pop. I had a long day, but I'm doing okay. And so he said, your mother wants me to ask you, every time he wanted to say something, he always said, your mother wanted me to ask you. He said, your mother wanted me to ask you if you still have that thing we gave you when you graduated from law school. And he was talking about the Joe Plumeri, attorney at law, signed the shingle. And I said, yeah, I still have it, Pop. He says, your mother says maybe you should go find that thing.
You know, Joe, your journey to Wall Street began, I don't know, a couple blocks away from where we are right
55
now.
55 Broad Street.
And you were a student matriculated at New York Law School. How did you get from the hard scrapple streets of Trenton, New Jersey, following your parents' dream that you might become a lawyer, and instead knock on the door that sends you on a completely different trajectory? Well,
I believe in playing in traffic. Playing in traffic doesn't mean go get hit by a car. It means show up. It means knock on doors. It means engage, because you'll never know what's going to happen if you don't engage. So I registered for my first year of classes at New York Law School, which is up the street on Worth Street. My classes were over at noon, so I thought it'd be a great idea to go knock on doors and find a job with a Wall Street law firm. I didn't know anybody in New York. I was by myself. So I thought all law firms had three names. So I'm looking at directories in the buildings, and I saw Carter, Berlind, and Weil at 55 Broad. I think that's a law firm. It doesn't say it's a brokerage firm. So I go upstairs, and I say in those days you could just walk in and out and do anything you want. So I said to the receptionist, who could I talk to about a job? And she said, well, this is very small. We don't have a personnel director. So she says, go down the hall and ask for Mr. Weil. So I go down
Sandy Weil.
The hall and ask for Mr. Weil, and he said, what can I do for you? And I said, look, so I'm going to law school in the morning, and I want to learn the academic in the morning and learn the practical parts of the law in the afternoon. And I give him the whole spiel, and it was great. It was a great spiel. And he says, that's a great idea, but what makes you think you can do that here? I said, this is a law firm. He said, no, it's a brokerage firm. And this was July 8th, 1968.
Carter, Berlind, and Weil. Yeah. Sounds like a law firm to
Sounds
me.
like a law firm. And I'm not easily embarrassed, but I wanted to get out of there fast because number one, I was in the wrong place, and two, I wasn't sure what a brokerage firm was. And he said, no, I like your moxie. He said, well, I'll give you a job after school. That's exactly what he said. And he took me down to where the brokers were, and they had nice suits, and and I'm a kid, just going to law school. So they said, give the kid a job in the afternoon, and they said, well, how many place to put him? Sandy said, take the door off the closet and stick a desk in the closet, so half of the desk will be in the closet, and the rest of me is in the hall. And people are walking around me, hit me in the back of the head, I'm the kid. And that's how I started on Wall Street. When I thought I was going to a law firm. Well, after 3 months, I'm listening to brokers. I see the way they're dressed. I like the trading stocks, and that's fun. And so after 3 months, I said, I think I want to be a broker.
The firm named then Carter, Berlind, and Weil, it eventually became Citigroup.
Right.
And the number of years that you worked?
32 years.
32 years with Sandy Weil and its successor companies. Your memories of this building and being involved with companies. You were head of a company called Primerica Financial Services that eventually spun out and had its IPO right here.
Right here. What was great about playing in traffic that day is that not only didn't I wind up at a law firm, I wound up at a brokerage firm, and happened to be the one that went from a very little firm to Citigroup. And along the way, Shearson Lehman Brothers, great acquisitions, and E.F. Hutton, which were great companies of the day. And it's 1968 from a closet to 1990, I was CEO of Shearson Lehman Brothers. I think less of that goes on today, Josh, because of technology, where people think texting somebody or emailing somebody or Instagramming somebody or doing all the technological things you do is enough, when in fact what people are really going to be driven by is what they see in your face, your desire, your passion, your sense of vision, your sense of yourself. That's going to make the difference between who you are and the other guy.
When your 32 years, Joe, were over at Citigroup, I think it was 1999, you could have just rode off into the sunset, but you played in traffic again and ended up ringing the bell of the New York Stock Exchange for an IPO of your own. How did that happen?
Well, I had been at Citi and all its predecessors, as you say, for 32 years, and everything I had done primarily was domestic. And I'm a what else guy, not a what is guy. And I always ask him, what else? What else is there? And the what else for me is that I had never run a global company. I had visited as a vacationer, a tourist, but not somebody that had a sense of the way things should be done here. I wanted to see if the same techniques and the same style could be transported across the sea or other seas. So I run into Henry Kravis in playing in traffic. I run into Henry Kravis in Paris. And I'm there between jobs. I had finished at Citigroup at the end of '99. I still hadn't found a job yet, but I was looking. And he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm looking for my next adventure. he said, I got this company I just bought called Willis. I didn't know who Willis was. I thought it was that kid on television. What's
Different
up?
strokes.
Different strokes. So he says it's a British brokerage firm. I wasn't sure what that was. He says it's the oldest brokerage firm in the world. And I said, I'm not sure I'm interested because I'm trying to picture Joe Plumeri in London. Like Fonzie in London.
Doesn't quite fit.
No, that's not going to fit. So it was a polite conversation, but it was because I was walking, because I was out playing in traffic. He happened to be walking, and so he called me a couple of weeks later, and obviously I went to see him because of who it is, and he generously, and he offered, he said, why don't you go over to see the company? So I did, talk to the chairman, but I went, and I guess I was overwhelmed by the fact that I could run a company that 200 years of its existence was never run by anybody but a Brit. Obviously, I'm an Italian-American from New Jersey, so I was as far away as you could get. So I wanted to prove that would work. It was a company that didn't make any money, so I wanted to prove that would work. And obviously, my style is a little different than the Brit style, or the style of a lot of the people in Willis at that time. And I wanted to take it public. It was private to be able to fix it. So it was all those motivations. And I went to London, played in traffic. I didn't know what was going to happen.
KKR wanted you to take it public within a couple of years?
They wanted me to take it public within 3 years. They said that was my goal. I took it public in 8 months. They bought the stock.
Right here at the stock
Right
exchange.
here. June 12th, 2001. I'll never forget it. Took pictures outside with my friend Dick Grasso. It was cool. And we brought the stock at 13 and a half, 8 months after, and the stock was valued at 3 when I got there. And the first tick was 16 and a half. I got the ticket. It's in a frame. And those days there were tickets. It was paper, and it was cool. Which just goes to show you, if you got imagination, you got a sense of vision, you got a sense of anything's possible. It's anything can happen if you have that about yourself. And I worry today with technology that's taken the human spirit, away from really what's made the difference between the way the world was and the way the world is today. And I think that's got to be injected back into the scheme. And I was at Willis for 13 years. I finally left. I don't know, the stock was 44 or 48 or whatever it was. And it was a great run. I got to see the world. I got a lot of great friends, opened the brokerage business in China, and great stories about that. A little kid from the neighborhood in New Jersey. So it was all about playing in traffic, but also having that sense about yourself that anything's possible, and your imagination is important if you're going to achieve a vision of any kind.
An incredible run, imagination and vision, two attributes that you need in incredible proportions now in what may be your greatest challenge. We'll talk about more with Joe Plumeri after this.
When the pressure is on to get that final order in before the close, you need to make sure that you have fast, secure access to the world's leading markets. Whether you need to trade or access data on ICE's futures exchanges, the NYSE, other third-party exchanges, or the leading cryptocurrency exchanges, ICE's Safety Network delivers premier content and direct market access to hundreds of global exchanges and trading desks around the world. Learn more about ICE's Safety Network at theice.com/SFTI.
We're back with my friend Joe Plumeri, the former chairman and CEO of Willis Group, the vice chairman of First Data, and as you'll hear very shortly, taking on his greatest challenge ever. Joe, we were talking about your time at Willis, a lot of highs there and some very tough lows. One of your board members was Joe Califano. Why did you pick Califano to be on your board, and how did that relationship extend beyond the boardroom?
I picked Joe Califano for a couple of reasons. I had the utmost respect for Joe Califano. If anybody's interested in why we smoke less and why you don't smoke in buildings and restaurants anymore, it dates back to Joe Califano. I always like to question why things are the way they are. When he was Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare under Jimmy Carter, he banned smoking in federal buildings without asking Carter, knowing full well that Carter wouldn't want him to do it. And there was such a backlash that he got fired. And he knew he'd get fired, but he thought it was a good cause. And that's what actually began the whole non-smoking effort in this country. So I always applauded what he had done, and he went from there right into addiction, and he created an organization called CASA, the Center for Addiction and Substance Abuse. And I thought that the work he was doing, especially with alcohol and tobacco, huge addictions in this country, bigger than the opiate addiction that we face today, and cocaine and heroin, is what he got involved in. And CASA did enormous research. He wrote 19 chapters of books. He wrote papers. There was 500 conferences. And the place where you wanted to know and get the information on addiction was CASA. And he did all that. And I was very, very proud to know him, and I thought that he could be very helpful to us because I love people with causes and I love people who have conviction. And he had cause and he had conviction, and he's a great man. And so we became good friends, and he was on a Willis board for a long time.
And you've been on the CASA board, I think, for 20 years. Why at this point did you decide to become the executive chairman of the National Center for Addiction and Substance Abuse yourself when Joe Califano decided it was time for him to retire?
I guess a couple of reasons, Josh. I mean, you get to a stage of your life when God's been good. I've done well. And I think the essence of this country is give back. I really do. I think what allows us to be able to provide for ourselves and our families the opportunity the country gives us. And when you get that opportunity and it's good to you and you're able to get some degree of success, you got to take that and you got to help other people. Secondly, I had the unfortunate death of my oldest son, die of overdose. And he had been addicted for quite some time. It was a long struggle. I write about it in my book as candidly as I possibly could so other people could learn from it and not make the same mistakes I did. And so I have a personal reason, and personal reasons are good.
Yep.
Because that's where the heart is. And I think the biggest epidemic of our age, New York Times said this, the biggest epidemic of our age is the addiction crisis. And it goes beyond opiates. I mean, opiates is the drug of the day, if you will. 3 years from now, it'll be something else. And it has to do with changing the culture, changing what's wrong with the culture that allows for people to want to become addicted. And you got to understand that these are not choices people make, it's a disease. So no different than catching a cold. Nobody goes to look to catch a cold, but they do because the atmosphere makes them catch a cold. So we need to be able to educate people about what allows for addiction to happen in this country and why our young people are becoming addicted by this disease. I mean, you got 63,000 people who died last year of some sort of an overdose or effect of a drug. Now, if I take guns and I take car accidents combined, it doesn't equal that. If I told, and you got 180 people dying a day of addiction. Now, if I told you we're going to have an Ebola attack tomorrow and 180 people are going to die, the building, everybody would leave the building.
Yep.
There would be a state of emergency in the city. The sirens would go off, and everybody would run for the hills. But that's what happens every day because it's something that we've just taken for granted. We are aware of this problem, but not quite ready to make it a national emergency like we would if Ebola was going to happen. If I take Hurricanes Sandy and Irma and Harvey together, they don't equal 180 deaths.
No.
And that's what's happening every day. So I want to do something about that because those statistics are overwhelming. And what's even more overwhelming, Josh, is that if I take the terrible, terrible plight of cancer, and my family's been affected by cancer, so I know all about cancer. 19 million people are affected by cancer. 40 million people are affected by addiction. Now, that's the 40 million that we know of. I don't know of all the people who suffer from a stigma that won't raise their hand and say, I'm affected by addiction. So the number is probably about 60 or 70 million people are affected by addiction, or close to 25, I mean, you're talking about, close to 25% of the population of this country is a big deal. And we got to be more aware of that. We have to raise the awareness to the fact of the matter that it's an urgent problem and it's a crisis.
A few months ago, Joe, last October, I think it was, President Trump took out his pen in the East Room and spoke about the opioid crisis. Let's go back to that moment, courtesy of David Muir and Cecilia Vega from ABC News.
President Trump declaring war on the nation's opioid crisis today and offering a very personal story about his brother and his battle with addiction. But the president was careful with his words, calling it a, quote, public health emergency, and why the words he chose could determine how much money the government will spend to fight this. ABC senior White House correspondent Cecilia Vega tonight.
With the stroke of a pen today, President Trump declared the opioid epidemic the worst drug crisis in American history.
I am directing all executive agencies to use every appropriate emergency authority to fight the opioid crisis.
Joe, what response have you seen since the president declared a national health emergency? And is the crisis getting worse or better?
I was excited when I heard that. I don't want to see any more parents burying kids. I don't want anybody to go through what I went through. What I went through is the worst thing that you can, nothing is worse than that. And I don't want kids not to lead a full life. And that's what we got going on here. And that's a national emergency. And what I am dedicated to do is to do something about that. And you're going to say, well, that's an awesome task. It's overwhelming. You're talking about the entire country changing its direction. I told you earlier, I think anything's possible. And that's got to start from the heart, and it's got to start with having a personal role in what's going on in this country, and that's what we're going to do.
As you mentioned, Joe, earlier, you were brutally honest with readers in the pages of The Power of Being Yourself that for all of your successes as a businessman, you could have been a better parent yourself. Why is parenting such a crucial component when it comes to preventing addiction?
I think there's two ingredients to parenting as far as I'm concerned, and I'm not a parenting expert. I'm only an expert at what you shouldn't do. I didn't say I love you enough, and I did not become involved enough in my son's life. And I think those two ingredients missing from a child's life, where you don't get the ongoing support of a parent, and you don't feel the ongoing love of a parent. I mean immersion. I don't mean hi and let's go get some ice cream or let's go to a movie once in a while, but I mean immersion. I don't mean immersion to the point where they call it helicopter parenting and you're all over the kid, but make them understand or her understand that you love them and you want to be involved in their life and you want to support them in a loving way. I didn't do that. The statistic, unfortunately, is that 1 out of 10 eighth graders have tried drugs. It's on its way, and when you're 15 years old, you've gotten to about 50% have tried drugs. Vaping, you can't smell, so that's another way to get marijuana. And they crush, opioids that the parents leave in their medicine cabinet, crush them and put it in punch at parties. And by the way, most of the people that are addicted become addicted before they're 18. And think about the one thing that affects all of the aspects of society. If you take, the criminal justice system, you take education, you take the economy, you take productivity, addiction hits all of those issues, and that's an emergency to me, and that's a call to arms by a society. And when you hear my rage, it's a rage against addiction. It's a rage against all of the people and the organizations that don't do anything about this problem that we have.
What's the one thing that you wish every parent knew about in this country?
I wish every parent understood that every child holds dear to them the comfort and the clarity that their parents love them and their parents are there to support them all the time. If you have that kind of environment, there's no need to go elsewhere to find it. And you're not going to find anything that's cosmetic in a drug that's going to give you that feeling to be made up for what your parents should be doing. We wrote a book at CASA called A Guide to Raising a Drug-Free Kid. The corpus of that book is about that. I experienced it myself, and what I would call, what I just said, Josh, was parent power. Parents can do a great deal in this country if they just absorbed what I was saying and think about it for a minute. It's a powerful, powerful weapon that has to be mechanized in this country, organized in this country in such a way that bigger than any army that we've ever put together to fight any war. And this is a biggie. You got 180 people a day dying. That's a big deal. When I go these statistics with people, their eyes are wide open and their mouth is open and they can't imagine how big a deal that is. You know the outrage when there's a shooting, an unfortunate shooting, and there's an outrage over guns. Well, guns are 30,000 people die from guns, and you got 63,000 people dying from addiction. And I don't see a march against addiction. There's lots of marches for other things, and appropriately so, don't misunderstand me. But I'm trying to speak on a relative basis about what should be the biggest problem, and I think that that kind of awareness and rising to that level is important.
Joe, the National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse is now concluding its 25th year, a historic one, on the track to make a meaningful difference in the opioid epidemic. You've written the book, you've done the research, and now you're focused on enacting meaningful change. What's needed from CASA in the future, and what do you got planned?
I think CASA has done a great job in all the research. We've done papers on what states should do with the opioid crisis. And if you want to find out what to do, CASA will tell you. The one thing we didn't do is do it. We left it up to somebody else to do it. And unfortunately, I don't think it was done. So I want to kind of move in the next 25 years from a think tank to a do tank and create the programs that the research said we ought to create. I'd love to put a model cities program together where everybody in the city, from the mayor to the principal of the school to all the parents in the community, say, not one more death in this city. And if everybody does that, Josh, and everybody raises their hand, no, that's not going to happen. But you got to mobilize everybody. There's got to be a sense of leadership. We need to work in the states. We need to pass laws and policies as it relates to what pharmaceuticals could manufacture. It's insane when somebody has an injury or an operation or whatever the case may be to get 30 Oxycontins or any number of other painkillers. Most people use 2, 3, 4, or 5. I don't touch them. Tylenol extra strength is fine with me. Yeah. But you put it back in the medicine cabinet, and then you know what happens.
Somebody
finds them, and then all heck breaks loose. So cities and states, it's policy, it's laws, it's working with pharmaceuticals to get this right. Work with companies to put programs in place to help companies help families of employees, which gets to the kids, because it's all about adolescence and prevention. The healthcare system. I want to know what the healthcare system is going to do about, cannabis in this country, because it seems to be growing and everybody thinks it's okay. I think treatment is still something that is elusive because treatment costs a lot of money. It's a political debate as well as to whether there's criminalization of people who are drug addicts. I do not think that's the case. I think it's a disease. So if I got a disease, I'm not a criminal. I simply have a problem that needs to be treated. So the whole treatment system has to be looked at, what hospitals do, treatment centers do, and then the cost of all of that. And then you got the notion of families. and what families should be doing, and the education of a family and what they should be doing to ensure that their children lead a full life. Those are lots of things that we have to do, but must do, if we're going to do something about what I think is a culture changer in this country.
Joe Plumeri, you've got your hands full for not only for this year, but for really decades to follow to get this problem solved. Thank you very much for joining us
today.
Thanks
for having me.
Inside the
Thanks
Ice House.
for allowing me to express how I feel, and everybody listening, how I feel about the national emergency that we have. And if we can do this, we can do anything. History tells us that Americans are great when we're down, but we're all fight together for a common purpose or a common cause. We can do that.
Indeed, Joe, indeed. That's our conversation this week. Our guest was Joe Plumeri, a man who's seen the world from the podium of the New York Stock Exchange, but is now making a difference where the rubber meets the road on one of America's toughest challenges as Executive Chairman of the National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse and Vice Chairman of First Data. If you like what you heard, please rate us on iTunes so that others know where to find us. Got a comment or question you'd like one of our experts to tackle in a future show? Tweet at us at NYSE. Our show is produced by Pete Ash and Ian Wolfe, with production assistance from Ken Abel. I'm Josh King, your host, signing off from the library of the New York Stock Exchange. Thanks for listening. See you next week.
Information contained in this podcast was obtained in part from publicly available sources and not independently verified. Neither ICE nor its affiliates make any representations or warranties, express or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of this information, and do not sponsor, approve, or endorse any of the content herein, all of which is presented solely for informational and educational purposes. Nothing herein constitutes an offer to sell or a solicitation of an offer to buy any security or recommendation of any security or trading practice.